Hi everyone, it's me. I am one of the hosts of a podcast, and I am here today to talk about something really near and dear to my heart, the history of autism research. When we started our podcast almost 10 years ago, we had no idea that we would be talking about the history of autism research. In fact, we didn't even know how far back the history of autism research went as we started digging into it. We found it was incredibly rich and deep and full of amazing people who were trying to understand this thing that we now call autism. So in this episode, I'm going to take you through a brief history of autism research, hit some of the highlights, and talk about how far we've come in understanding autism. Before the early 20th century, there was no scientific study of autism. Children who exhibited what we today might call autistic behaviors were often attributed to things like bad parenting or even moral panics around things like witchcraft. It wasn't until the early 1900s that we started to see some of the first descriptions of what we today would call autism. In the early 1900s, three separate researchers described three separate children who exhibited behaviors that are now considered autistic, but it wasn't until 1911 that the term autism was actually used for the first time. In the mid-1900s, several researchers started to notice patterns in the way that autistic people think and behave and started to develop theories about what might cause autism. One of the most prominent theories at the time was that autism was caused by something called a false self. This theory posited that autistic people create a false persona to hide their true selves from the world. This theory was not only incorrect, but it was also incredibly harmful as it led to a lot of autistic people being lobotomized in an attempt to correct their behavior. In the late 1940s, a researcher named Leo Kanner published a paper describing for children with what he called early infantile autism. This is considered to be the first formal description of autism as a distinct condition. In the 1950s and 60s, researchers started to develop some of the first treatments for autism. One of the most popular treatments was a form of behavioral therapy called applied behavior analysis, or ABA. ABA is still used today, but it has evolved and there are now several different approaches to ABA. In the 1980s, researchers started to take a more medical approach to understanding autism. This led to the development of the first medications used to treat the symptoms of autism. In the 1990s, researchers started to identify some of the first genetic causes of autism. This discovery led to the development of the first biological markers for autism. In the 2000s, the autism research community started to become more interested in understanding the strengths and challenges of autistic people. This led to the development of the first autism-specific therapies and interventions. And today, autism research is more active than it has ever been before. There are hundreds of labs around the world studying all aspects of autism. We have identified hundreds of genes that are associated with autism, and we are starting to develop new treatments that target these genes. We have come so far in understanding autism, but there is still so much that we don't know. But that is okay, because every piece of knowledge that we acquire brings us closer to understanding ourselves and each other better. If you want to learn more about the history of autism research, I highly recommend checking out the resources provided. Thanks for watching.